On the 1st of August 1941, I had to be in the Jaeger barracks at St Avold in the Westmark by 3 p.m. If the word Westmark had not been added, I would not have had even a vague idea as to where my destination was. Westmark was the name given to that region which had been added onto the Reich after the surrender of France. Whether that included only the former German Alsace and Lorraine, or more, no one knew. In any event, I had to seek the aid of a large-scale map to find St Avold, which I finally discovered lay between Saarbrücken and Metz in Lorraine. The 1st of August was not a normal call-up deadline. The normal dates were the 1st of April and the 1st of October. It turned out that there were, in fact, only a few of us young lads who turned up on the 1st of August 1941, in accordance with our call-up orders. In the meantime, Mum was in the Liesertal with Rudi and Liesel, so I went for a few days to where they were staying in Zlabing post Lieserbrücke. For the 31st of July, they had planned a trip out to the parsonage at Eisentraten to visit the family of Pastor Schimmick, a school friend of Father's. From there, I began my journey on the regular afternoon post bus. The journey took me first as far as Spittel on the Drau, and from there by rail via Salzburg. During the night, we crossed southern Germany to Saarbrücken. There I left the express train to get on an ordinary passenger train going towards Metz. On the platform, I met a boy who was looking around just as I was. He was dragging along 2 big suitcases. I spoke to him, and it turned out that we were both going to the same place. He was Ludwig Wigel Popowski, the son of a Vienna tram driver. In him I had found my first comrade. We remained close through 2 years, more or less. Neither of us knew or had any explanation why we had ended up in that particular district. We also knew nothing about the unit to which we had been assigned, namely the 2nd Company of Infantry Ersatz Battalion 7, nor from which part of the country its members came. Wiggle, like me, had left it up to chance as to what infantry unit he would be assigned. The mystery was resolved shortly after we arrived. First, after getting out at St Avold station, we had to lug our heavy luggage 2 kilometres over a mountain, behind which lay the little town. At the edge of it was the Jaeger barracks. We arrived at about 2:30 p.m. Although we were not yet soldiers, we had nevertheless to experience for ourselves the truth of the saying that half his life the soldier has to wait in vain. There are certainly good reasons for that. At 3 p.m., however, to a certain extent in an official manner, there began the new and serious part of my life. It turned out that altogether there were 4 of us soldiers who had been provisionally accepted as officer candidates. Most were from Lower Silesia. 1 came from the Ruhr area, 2 from Trautenau in Lower Bohemia, and the 2 of us, Popowski and I, came from Vienna and the Vienna area. The battalion stationed in St Avold was the Ersatz unit for Infantry Regiment 7, in peacetime based in Schweidnitz. We found out that the entire Silesian Ersatz Army Corps had been moved into the Westmark. In the French campaign regiment, 7 had been commanded by a colonel from Vienna. At that time, replacements had been added to the regiment to the strength of almost a battalion of men from Vienna. It was the case, right up to the end of the war, that in almost every company I came across there was at least 1 Viennese or Austrian. For my part, I often regretted that I had made no attempt to join a unit from my homeland. Before I became a soldier, I had dreamed how grand it must be to march in the victory parade through the Ringstrasse with the returning troops. But later my regret was because I had no close wartime comrades living nearby. That became clear to me when eventually I sat on the Linz Regional High Court with my colleagues Zauner and Hemmetsberger. They had been in the Linz Division, the 45th. Zauner was among the men of the Linz Infantry Regiment, the sons of the region and of the city, who marched off to war from the castle barracks. Hemmetsberger had been an artillery officer in the division. Immediately after installation, under which general heading I include being assigned a barrack room and a bed, and obtaining items of military uniform and equipment, there began the rigorous service involved in basic training. It lasted 6 weeks. It turned out that this too had been a kind of test. Of the 17 of us who had joined on the 1st of August, 6 were dismissed because they did not meet requirements. Because they were not yet of age for military service, they were sent back home. We could easily imagine with what mockery they would be welcomed back to school by their classmates who had stayed behind, after their experience of a holiday that brought so much trouble. So, 11 of us remained together. Our service went on, apart from the normal work of the barracks, under the supervision of a lieutenant, a NCO, and a Gefreiter, who, at the same time, was senior soldier in the barrack room. The 11 of us were Hans Altermann from Gottisberg in Silesia, Walter Bormann from Breslau, Walter Henschel from Reichenbach in the Eulengebirge, Hans Berndt and Gottfried Bergmann from Liegnitz, Jochen Fiedler from Glogau, Diesel and Helmut Überler from Trautenau, Pohlmann from Wuppertal, together with Popovsky and me. Since Popovsky had a camera with him, I have some photos. The first shows us in a group on the parade ground. We are wearing field service jackets, with our top collar button undone, our belts buckled, army boots and the forage field service caps on our heads. My hands are still stuck into my trouser pockets in a quite unmilitary fashion. After basic training was over, we were moved to Mörchingen, halfway between Metz and Saargemund. The place mostly consisted of barracks built after 1871, after Alsace-Lorraine had reverted to Germany. Here was the staff of Ersatz Regiment 28, to which the 2 infantry regiments 350 and 461 belonged. From then on, our group was part of the 2nd Company of Infantry Ersatz Battalion 350. I scarcely have any recollections of St. Avold, because at the time, during basic training, you were not allowed to leave the barracks. I can only remember one single trip out that we used to find a photographer's studio. I recall Mörchingen as the place where all our training took place, carried out on the parade ground and on the firing range. Certainly in St. Avold we drilled on the parade ground and first practiced with our weapons. That was only a little compared with the variety of the drill to which we were then subjected. The training regulations for the infantry, AVI, Army Service Regulations, HDV 130/2A, for Schützenkompanie was the Bible according to which our life as soldiers then proceeded. From the individual training I shall quote the following, concerning the basic position. 1. The soldier's good bearing is an index of his training and overall physical education. It is to be improved whenever everyday service provides the opportunity. 2. Standing without weapon to attention. In the basic position the man stands still. The feet stand with the heels close together. The toes are placed as far apart as to position the feet at not quite a right angle to each other. The weight of the body rests at the same time on the heels and on the balls of both feet. The knees are slightly straightened. The upper body is held erect, the chest slightly pushed forward. The shoulders are at an equal level. They are not drawn up. The arms are stretched gently downwards, the elbows pressed moderately forward. The hand touches the upper thigh with fingertips and wrist. The fingers are together. The middle finger lies on the trouser seam, the thumb along the index finger on the inside of the hand. The head is held erect, the chin a lit tulle drawn back into the neck. The eyes are directed straight ahead. The muscles are easy, and at the same time tensed. Convulsive over-tension of muscles leads to a poor and forced bearing. 3. Should there be heard the cautionary part of a word of command, the call of a superior, or the command Achtung, without these being preceded by Attention, the man of course remains still. 4. Stand at ease. The left foot is moved forward. The man may move, but not speak without permission. We had the old Kar 98 rifle. Rifle training was followed by training on the light machine gun, LMG, the 08 pistol, the machine pistol, the hand grenade, and the anti-tank rifle. All that was followed by the infantryman's training in combat and field service, and training in close quarters fighting. No less important was training in the section, the smallest unit, which consisted of the section leader and 9 men. The section leader is leader and first of his section into battle. He is responsible for 1. Carrying out his combat task, 2. Direction of the light machine gun fire and, as far as combat allows, the rifle troops, 3. Ensuring that the weapons, ammunition and equipment of his section are ready for combat and are at full strength. Section training also included the section's method of combat, its behaviour under fire, working its way forward, penetration, taking and holding a position, withdrawing, as well as the group being on reconnaissance service and picket duties. HDV 130/2A, of course, also covered training in the platoon and in the company. All that was contained in 670 points. Infantry officer training, however, not only required the knowledge necessary to command a section, a platoon or a company, but also knowledge of the so-called heavy infantry weapons, that is the heavy machine gun, the heavy mortar, the light and heavy infantry guns, and the anti-tank gun. It covered training in horse riding and driving, the latter including driving both horse-drawn and motorized vehicles. By listing the material, it can be seen that we spent most of our service time on the training ground. We began with simply moving around the ground in the respective formation, then to march training in formations of different, slowly increasing lengths, and finally firing practice. All that was preceded by a thorough process of training in firing positions. I proved to be a good shot. I soon found out that my vision in my right eye was not as sharp as that in my left. The eye test we had when we mustered had been a cursory one. It was only much later that I became aware that I had an astigmatism, with a clear decrease in visual sharpness of my right eye as against my left. Meanwhile, after I had successfully tried shooting left-handed, I stuck with it and achieved excellent results. At the exercises at 100 range, standing off-hand, and 200 range, lying off-hand, I managed to score 30 and 55 respectively, and thus was in the narrow range leading the group. Firing practice, and the marches that regularly took place on Saturday, stood out from the drill on the parade ground. Firing practice involved bodily relaxation. Marches involved particular bodily exertion. If on the first march, which lasted an hour, we covered only 5 kilometers, within a few weeks that was increased in 10-kilometer increments to 55 kilometers. It all led to the very edge of exhaustion. As proper infantrymen, on the marches we wore footcloths instead of socks, and before the march we smeared our feet with deer tallow so that, provided our boots fitted, blisters or sores hardly ever occurred. Only once did I get so-called pressure points, that is, blisters under the hard skin. They were extremely painful, but at least entitled me to sit up on the horse-drawn vehicle that followed behind us. Everyday life in the barracks began with réveil, soon followed by the duty NCOs, UVD, call those detailed to fetch coffee step out. Before work began, 1.5 hours after réveil, morning washing had to be done, beds had to be made expertly and lockers tidied up. Inside work included cleaning weapons and cleaning barrack blocks. The weekly hour of polishing and patching also took place as part of the daily boot cleaning and occasional uniform cleaning science. We pressed the trousers of our walking-out uniform by laying them overnight between the sheet and the straw mattress. In addition to the field uniform and drill clothing, every man also possessed a walking-out uniform. It was called Saracani because in actual fact it looked by no means smart but resembled circus dress. While the field uniform was made of single coarse cloth of a green-grey-brown colour, the walking-out uniform had 2 different kinds of grey cloth. The jacket was vaguely green, but the trousers were more of a blue tinge. The collar was dark green, the collar patches and those on the forearms were of silver braid trimming. To that was added the field service cap and, best of all, the white braid, which was the colour of the infantry arm of the service. Apart from its smart and clean appearance, this colour always seemed to me to express the innocence and unpretentiousness for which the infantry was praised. Other colours used were the red of the artillery, the green of the Gebirgsjäger, the black of the pioneers, the blue of the medical units, the bright blue of the panzer units, the citrus yellow of the signals units, the dark yellow of the cavalry and later reconnaissance troops, and the violet of the military chaplains. But none of them could compare with our pure white. Outside training mainly took place on the large garrison training ground. However, especially for marching, we switched to the friendly, hilly countryside near to, or further away from, Mörschingen. Once we were resting near a large plum orchard that was far away from any village. It gave the lieutenant the idea that we shouldn't take cover there and stuff our bellies. Some time later, before the wine harvest, our march took us past a field that was planted with vines. Here, too, the lieutenant let us take cover between the furrows. As you see in old pictures of the land of milk and honey, we lay on our backs between 2 furrows, reaching for the nearly ripe grapes hanging over us, and contentedly ate our fill. The most pleasant activity, because it was completely different from all the others, we had on Wednesdays. Then, from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. there was riding, and from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. driving. In our riding training, each one of us had his own horse. Mine was the mare Orange. Everyone had to keep a piece of bread from his rations for the horse, to win its trust and to be able to reward it. We learned not to approach the animal from the rear, and how to bridle and saddle it. We also had to muck out the stalls and brush the horses. During the course of that training, we learned the paces of the horse, the walk, trot, and gallop, and how to control the horse. Finally, in the riding arena, we jumped modest obstacles and performed exercises on horseback. Riding outside was more satisfying than strenuous, especially when, after our first few hours of riding, our behinds were not burning anymore. Once I must have irritated Orange because she bolted with me on the training ground. She slipped into a raging gallop and I could not hold her. After almost a kilometre she had calmed down, but evidently wanted to vex me some more, because she stopped abruptly in her tracks. I had to summon up all my strength not to fly out of the saddle, which is certainly what she intended. The driving instruction passed off without such difficulties. To drive a horse-drawn vehicle was something we learned in an afternoon, but instruction in driving motor vehicles stretched out over several months. As well as a thorough theoretical and technical training, taken with the aid of an Army Service regulation book, a lot of time was spent on the driving itself. We rode motorcycles with sidecars, and drove a medium-weight Kübelwagen. On the 18th of January 1942, that is, a few days after my 18th birthday, we received our Wehrmacht driving licenses. On Wednesday evenings in the officers' mess, there were gentlemen's evenings. We officer cadets, in our walking-out uniforms, of course, had to take part. Before dinner, you would stand about aimlessly in the side rooms of the dining hall. Then the commander of the Ersatz regiment would invite us to take our places. On the first occasion we were, understandably, somewhat awkward and almost stood in ranks. That led a doctor, whom I later got to know as a very clever man, to the sarcastic remark, "Ah, the gentlemen have turned up for confirmation." We did not always sit together at the end of the table, but were placed individually between officers, and thus had to take part in their conversation. If I had not already learned at home how to behave at table, I would have been taught it there. It is true that I had not learned at home that you had, on occasion, to manage with only 40 cm space at the table. That had to be done on Christmas Eve, when the wives of the married officers were invited to dine with us and space was tight at the table. On those occasions, and also on the gentlemen's evenings, music was supplied by a Palm Court orchestra, composed of members of the Regimental Music Corps. It was frowned upon to speak of service matters. That was strictly avoided. On the gentlemen's evenings we were allowed out for longer. We were allowed to stay out after the general lights out, I think, until midnight. The food in the officers' mess was not better than that in the barracks canteen, but was cooked separately. An exception was made at Christmas and New Year, when everyone got a portion of carp or tench. But in addition, there were also bratwürstchen or bockwurst that assuaged our hunger, and together with the potato salad, laid down a good basis for the wine. In the Merschingen officers' mess you could buy splendid French wine. It was there that I drank my first white and red Bordeaux and Burgundy. In St. Avold there had often been air raid warnings that mostly lasted from midnight until the enemy aircraft had left the area of the Reich. For that reason, dutails were assigned in such a way that, after reveille at 4:30 a.m., they began at 6 a.m. After the meal set for 10:30 a.m., the lunch break lasted until 2 p.m., so that everyone could catch up the sleep they had lost during the night. There were none of those annoying disturbances in Merschingen. Once, in the autumn, we went to Strasbourg and saw the sights of that beautiful city, by then once again in Germany. On the platform of the Minster, from where you got the wide view eastwards into the Black Forest and westwards into the Vosges, Ludwig Popovsky took our photograph. At that time he had attached himself to Helmut Uberler from Trautenau. I had become friendly with Hans Altermann from Gottesberg in the Riesengebirge. From Altermann I have a written testimony to our friendship which he wrote for me in the little book Novellen aus Metz, which each of us had received from the regimental commander as a Christ Mass present. "Either we shall meet in victory or never again," the young man had prophetically written. A year later, when we passed out of the War College in Dresden, of us 11 comrades there only remained Henschel, Popovsky and I. Fiedler wanted to become an officer of engineers. I later chanced to meet him on Liegnitz station as a Panzerleutnant. I met Bormann at about the same time, in the spring of 1944, in Mährisch-Schönberg. From the summer of 1942, he had had a stiff knee, and without attending War College had, after a long delay, become an officer. Of the others, I never heard anything more. As far as my friend Hans Altermann is concerned, I am sure that he was killed in action as early as 1942. It is time that I described our instructors, who no doubt had been selected for that duty. The Gefreiter and senior soldier in our block, Herbert Kreckler, was a candidate for NCO, a small blond young man from a Silesian village. His place was shortly afterwards taken by Obergefreiter Wahl. I met Kreckler in the summer of 1942 at Upolossi, when we were both already NCOs and could call each other by the familiar du. A few days later, he was killed in action. Wahl was getting on for 30, and to judge by his appearance and behaviour, came from a town. The NCO, August Gehler, during the French campaign, had suffered a fractured pelvis from a falling tree. Like Wahl, he was a patient, self-controlled instructor who never lost his temper and carried out his duties in an exemplary manner. Lieutenant Riedel came from Bad Reinitz in the county of Glatz. He was, as he would proudly relate, the son of a worker and had joined the army after leaving school. He was extraordinarily agile and intelligent. Like Gehler, he was a fair-minded superior officer who showed preference to no one and provided us with a thorough training. He, too, gave each of us a little book for Christmas. I corresponded later with Riedel, but do not know what became of him, or of Gehler and Wahl. Once, when I was suffering from bad toothache, I had to visit Riedel in his room before morning duties, to wake him and knock him up to ask permission to be allowed to go on sick parade to the dentist. I was not sure how he would react to being disturbed, and was pleasantly surprised when he gave me permission without question. The 2 photographs of our Christmas in barracks show us 11 officer cadets with Obergefreiter Wahl in our Saracani jackets. In front of the Christmas tree in the background, there are on the left some lockers, and against the wall, in front of them, a bunk bed. In the foreground is the long table. In the second photograph, we are sitting with our tunics off. In front of the darkened window is the big tree, decorated with lametta and many burning candles. From the ceiling is hanging the big Advent wreath, and on the table, too, some lights are still burning. In front on the left sits Popovsky. Beside him, Altermann, on the right opposite, Himmelberger, and in front of him is me, with a reflective questioning expression. Better than all the service regulations intended for training, instruction, and individual study was the Reiber. It was named after its author, Dr. Ur W. Reiber, Hauptmann and company commander. A 300-page compendium, it was entitled Der Dienstunterricht im Heere, that is, service instruction in the army. We used the green-bound edition for the men of the Schützenkompanie. The Reibert was an excellent systematic compendium of all the training material. As well as the introduction for service instruction, it was divided into the sections patriotism, the soldier's profession and its duties, sense of duty, behavior of the soldier, the army, anti-gas defense, close-range weapons, weapons and equipment, drill, firing, together with duties in the field and combat. In addition to the oath on the colours, the words of which everyone had to know and repeat as he was sworn in, there were the duties of the German soldier, about which Reibert states, "The German soldier is expected to know the following articles by heart and word for word." They read, 1. The Wehrmacht bears arms for the German folk. It protects the German Reich and fatherland, the folk, bound into one in National Socialism and its living space. The roots of its power lie in a glorious past, in German Volkstum, German soil and German labour. Service in the Wehrmacht is a service of honour to the German Volk. 2. The honour of the soldier lies in the full and unconditional offering of his person for Volk and fatherland, even unto sacrificing his life. 3. The highest virtue of the soldier is aggressive courage. This demands toughness and resolve. Cowardice is a disgrace. Hesitation is unsoldier-like. 4. Obedience is the foundation of the Wehrmacht. Trust the foundation of obedience. Soldierly leadership rests on delight in taking responsibility, on superior ability and tireless care. 5. Great achievements in war and peace can only come about in the unshakable fighting community of leader and troops. 6. Fighting community demands comradeship. Comradeship is particularly proven in need and danger. 7. Self-possessed and yet modest, upright and true, God-fearing and truthful, discreet and incorruptible, the soldier should be to the entire Volk a model of manly strength. Only achievements justify pride. 8. His greatest reward and greatest happiness is found by the soldier in the consciousness of duty joyfully fulfilled. Character and achievement are the hallmarks of his way and of his worth. Those duties hark back in their essentials to the Imperial Army and probably to still older regulations. Millions of soldiers in both world wars modelled themselves on those regulations. In the Second World War, soldiers followed their guidelines right to the bitter end. For those born after those wars, it is hard to comprehend. But for me and my comrades, who willingly submitted ourselves to those duties, with all the idealism of youth, they were a kind of profession of faith. To give an example of the sterling quality and thoroughness of the rebut, I will quote from the general principles of the barracks, room and locker regulations. Anyone who shouts, howls and engages in tussles in quarters offends against discipline and order. Decorous singing is permitted if barrack block comrades agree. Popular songs, hackneyed old hits, and songs of an obscene nature are not a suitable part of a soldier's singing repertoire. In the barrack block, that is the soldier's home, scrupulous order and cleanliness is to be paramount at all times. The tone adopted among the block inmates should be comradely so that they can get along well with each other. Lunch is a communal meal both because of technical necessity, for reasons of military order, and to cultivate comradeship. For meals, the soldier will appear with clean hands, clean fingernails, and with his hair combed. At table he will sit upright, will not unnecessarily rattle about with the crockery, will be decorous, and refrain from unsuitable chatter. There are many other examples that could be added. However, it may become clear why, in our day, the Wehrmacht was spoken of as the school of the Nation. In that school, even the simple man of the people learned a lot that he had not learned from either his parents or his teachers. At the end of 1986, 45 years on, when I read the letters that I wrote to my family from Saint-Avold and Merchingen during that first period as a soldier, I was astonished by the dispassion and distance with which I regarded the business of the army, although I was right in the middle of it. In all conscience I had shrugged everything off. To have to learn hard lessons, to go through troubles and exertions, to have the occasional moments of harassment had never become too much for me. In any event, neither I nor my officer cadet comrades had ever been reduced to tears. That was something about which the regimental commander had once asked at the gentleman's evening. He no doubt was speaking from personal experience as he thought of his own time as a cadet. Certainly the cadets of the Imperial Army, about whom such stories were told, had been much younger. For them, the seriousness of military life had begun when they were only 10 years old. In my first letter to my mother and sisters, I complained that we have really very little time, and that we officer cadets were given the most impossible things to do. Thus, for instance, would you believe it, I had been ordered by the UVD to darn his leather gloves. Nevertheless, I completed it to his total satisfaction. On the 4th of August 1941, I had to travel to Metz to the Reserve Military Hospital for a specialist medical examination of my heart. At my recruitment medical, the unit MO diagnosed a serious defect. In Metz it proved, thank God, to be a completely wrong diagnosis. Otherwise I would have been sent home, which would have been a big disappointment. After only 10 days we were having firing practice for the first time. Then was our swearing in, a ceremonial occasion. In the afternoon we had no duties, and we had our first trip out, it is true, with our NCO and Obergefreiter. But it was quite nice. We gorged ourselves at a confectioner's. For once at least we were full again, otherwise we are always hungry. Yesterday we got our pay books and identity tags. To father I reported on the 25th of August that today we had been flushed out, quick marched with machine gun and gas mask, and then over the 2.5 m high-scaling wall. But still, I don't let it get me down, you needn't worry. In the group there's a lot to laugh about, and you get through everything much easier with humour than with idealism. On the 4th of September, I told mother of a stay in sick quarters. The cause was angina, from which I had suffered a lot in my youth. In that letter I was longing for my school days, but in the next sentence went on that we all really think that we've never had any other life than the one we have now in the military. Our time as civilians is only a beautiful dream. For all that we're happy and contented. In the letter of the 18th of September to my mother, I reported that in the last 2 days we have had no rest at all at night. The day before yesterday we had night exercises until 12:30 a.m., then straight into the air raid shelter until 2:30 a.m. Yesterday was gentleman's evening again, very jolly, then air raid shelter again until 2 a.m. A gentleman's evening like that, I said, was as good as a rest, despite the tightness of space, especially the tightness of my tunic. I sat at table with the colonel, but fortunately he left about 10 p.m. Then things got going. You get used to drinking. Today I can feel no ill effects at all. At the beginning of October, the recruits arrived who were born in 1922. They had been called up normally. For us officer cadets, who had the so-called inspection behind us, it meant that we had reached the lowest rung on the military ladder. We were assigned as block seniors, and during the mornings served as assistant instructors. My 9 men, all but 2, were Silesian farm lads. In my letter of the 18th of October, I answered Mother's question as to how I was feeling to be block senior. It was very nice, I said. The work was quiet and we didn't have to do any more lousy jobs. On the other hand, we didn't have any more free time for ourselves, particularly because we needed to attend the officers' mess very often. We had to go to the gentleman's evening there 3 evenings a week, as well as having to have lunch there on Saturdays and Sundays. At another level that made a change. Among the older officers who frequented the mess was the leading baritone of the Breslau Opera. The Palm Court Orchestra that sometimes played in the evenings was conducted by the opera's first violin. At the end of October, I told Mother and Rudy of my success in pistol shooting, that our training work was indeed easier, but not our other work. Part of that meant we had to run the obstacle course with the heavy machine gun, the mortar, and each of us carrying 50 lb weight. I also told them about essay subjects. We had to write the essays in the evenings we were not at the officers' mess. The theme, "Loyalty is the very marrow of honor," is something I could still write about today, unlike the question, "Why must Russia lose the war?" I give an account of the swearing-in of the recruits as a ceremonial occasion in which the Regimental Music Corps participated. They played, among other things, the Chorale Wir treten zum Beten vor Gott, den Gerechten. We come to pray before God, the Just One, the so-called Dutch prayer of thanks. In a letter of the 30th of October to Liesel, who was 7 at the time, I wrote that snow had fallen overnight, but that I was sorry I couldn't go sledging with her, but on the other hand, had to be glad if no one was going sledging with me. I do not remember whether at the time we actually suffered from hunger, even if I often wrote about hunger and tiredness. But it was no wonder. The unaccustomed physical strains reached the very limits of what we could tolerate. Others, thank God not me, experienced symptoms of exhaustion such as nosebleeds. The comradeship among us 11 was good, even if at first we 2 Austrians and the 2 Sudeten Germans did not feel really very comfortable together. That was why I wrote with delight, "Now and then I meet a fellow countryman," such as a man from Weidhofen who had studied with our Professor Höchtl. By the middle of January 1942, we had completed the first stage of our training, and after a successful inspection, we were promoted to Gefreiter. Then, too, came the longed-for leave, during which an event occurred that threatened to derail my plans. Literally overnight, I got severe pains in the region of my appendix, which required that I was admitted immediately into the Stockerau Civilian Hospital. In the middle of the night, the consultant had to be fetched. After palpating my abdomen, to no little horror on my part, he uttered the words, "It's too late." In fact, the appendix had perforated, but an infection had developed which had to be cured before there was any question of an operation. I had to remain in hospital for some weeks. On the day after I was admitted, I was laid down in a small room. The only other patient there I recognized as my schoolmate, Ewald Henk. A few days previously, had found out from Hertha he had attempted suicide because of an unhappy love affair. The object of his affections was Mausi Grundschober, a really striking girl who, however, had not yielded to his advances. Standing in front of a mirror in order to give particularly drastic form and experience to the scene, Ewald shot himself through the body with a 6.35 mm Flober rifle, but he had set the barrel muzzle too low with the result that he shot himself in the left lung and spleen. After the shot, he dropped the rifle and staggered wailing into the family living room where he cried, "Help me, I have shot myself." My great worry was that the ill-timed appendix would throw me completely off course, or else delay my training. Only at the end of March did I arrive back with mixed feelings in Merchingen, just in time to be able to spend a few days with my comrades before they left for the field. A farewell photo shows us on the steps in front of a door in the barracks building, crowding round our Lieutenant Riedel, our NCO Gehler and Obergefreiter Wahler. For the farewell, which meant the end of our period of training, we received presents from the Lieutenant. For me, he had selected a small volume of poetry, Volk vor Gott. This showed that he had not only recognized the religious bent instilled in me by my parents, but that he also admired it. The dedication harked back to the hard period of training and also contained a maxim for my future. Dear Scheidebauer, life brings us many hardships, but it is only in these that we show our strength. We overcome, we never give up, the reward will be ours. The little book contains Gebet in höchster Not, a prayer when things are at their worst, by Ricarda Huch, Gebet der Knechte und Mägde, a prayer of the lads and lasses, by Richard Billinger, Die innere Gestalt, a prayer, the inner form, by Josef Weinheber, Geistliches Lied, a song of the spirit, by Hermann Claudius, Zuflucht, a refuge, by Ina Seidel, Haussegen des deutschen Bauern, the German farmer's blessing on his house, by Paula Grogger, and Jochen Klepper's Neujahrslied, a New Year's song. Hermann Stehr, Heinrich Zillich, Walter Flex, Bergengruen and Rilke, Agnes Niegel and Rudolf Alexander Schröder with his Lobgesang, a song of praise, were among the authors. The last page contained the prophetic dedication of my friend Hans Altermann that I have already mentioned. Either we shall meet again in, or never again. Always your friend Hans. My comrade's assignment, the term by which it was known to us, was followed by dreary weeks for me. I was only fit for indoor duties, and was employed as recruit Gefreiter in the 2nd Company of Infantry Ersatz Battalion 461 in the neighbouring barracks. The recruits, who reported on the 1st of April, were all from the eastern part of Upper Silesia, aged from 30 to 35 years, and were all members of the so-called Volksgruppen 2 and 3. According to that system of classification, which still covered the Reich Germans, Volksgruppe 1, and the Poles, Volksgruppe 4. There were those who professed to be German or who were still classified as Germans. 2 of these I can still see. One was a slim, sensitive cobbler Slavik from Ornontowitz near Gleiwitz. The other was a small, black-haired and round-headed Hilfsarbeiter Stanitzek from Hindenburg. Slavik used to tell of his craft and how he had made orthopedic footwear, but also had made riding boots for Polish officers. He told us that he had not long been married. He had taken a kind of vow never to take off his wedding ring, and spoke of his marriage in a way that impressed me. But he was killed in Russia when he went into action for the first time. Stanitzek was a true Pierun. I remember him as a Schweik character. He taught me how to drink 96% proof vodka, that is, trickled onto a sugar cube. I then had more time for myself, and went into the officers' mess as I had before. Jochen Fiedler, who had a wireless set, left it behind for me. After 4 weeks I had to report to the medical officer, and at the beginning of May was sent to the Reserve Military Hospital in Metz. For a few more days I was under observation. Indoor duties, such as peeling potatoes, in comparison with my previous duties, I found demeaning. If they were not on the agenda, we could go out and look around the town. I went for walks in the parks by the Moselle, and even went to a concert. One afternoon I had been in a coffee house and got into conversation with Wolfgang Schneiderhahn, the young leader of the Vienna Philharmonic. That evening he was playing Beethoven's Violin Concerto. The German cultural life in Metz was mostly provided by artists from Vienna. Later I found out that at that time people like Josef Meinrad were engaged in the theatre in Metz. On the 10th of May I was operated on and after about a fortnight discharged back to Mörchingen. Of my fellow patients, I remember a Feldwebel who had a sliver of bone from his lower thigh transplanted into his lower arm in order to make the arm more mobile. The Feldwebel was a teacher and had an education to match. He played chess, and so we were able to pass the time playing chess and in conversation. Nevertheless, I was impatient and would not accept my fate. I would much rather be in Russia in the worst muck, as I wrote to Mother. She and Aunt Lotta, she said, had a little natural tendency or talent to be mothers of German heroes. However, my letters spoke of little else. There was not even loving raillery, but a few reproaches that she had not written. It was rather a restrained kind of tenderness, with frequent assurances that I was thinking a lot of her and my sisters, and was her thankful son. In one Christmas present, the little book Wie die Pflicht es befahl, as duty commanded, words from our war poets, The editor's foreword states that in this struggle all Germans are animated by a single belief. It is belief in the mission of the Führer and in the eternal nature of the Reich. There is a single certainty that Germany shall live, even if we must die. To the quotations from works of the war, poets Walter Flex, Ernst Jünger, Baumelberg and Zöberlein, etc., was added the then well-known poem An die Mutter by a certain Irmgard Grosch. Its last verse runs, "If I fall, mother, you must bear it, and your pride will overcome your pain, for you were allowed to bring a sacrifice to him whom we mean when we speak the word Germany." Such proud mourning, as was displayed in many death announcements at that time, would certainly have been beyond my mother. I am also unable to say how she took the news of the death of my brother. He was killed in action, as late as April 1945. But the poem had little effect on me. Naturally, its heroic tone, all the more so in the poetic art form, appealed to me. But the thought that it could be I who was being mourned like that did not occur to me. I never suffered from premonitions of death, but carried the conviction that it would never happen to me. I was even then looking forward with confidence to the longed-for test of the front, and left for the field with a light heart. The Reich was in danger. It was not Germany that had declared war on England and France, but they that had declared war on Germany. But as far as the Soviet Union was concerned, there was no doubt about what the Reich government had written, in its declaration of war, to the Soviet government. The German Volk is conscious that it is called to save the whole civilized world from the deadly dangers of Bolshevism, and to lay the way open for a true process of social advancement in Europe. That extract from the declaration was printed in small print on the upper edge of many field postcards. Who among us could have doubted the truth of what was said there? Who could have proved it to be wrong?